when I share stories about patients and people's reaction is often, well, if this person ate better or exercised more or was less obese, they wouldn't have any of these problems. And I find that
Dr. Adam Cifu, and he's probably one of our nation's best thinkers. He recently wrote a piece called Coming Out Against the Healthy Lifestyle. How do you recommend people find a doctor to work with that is willing to sort of have these deeper conversations?
there's so many people who do a good job at this, but we need more of them. Be empowered when you're meeting a doctor the first time, and then ask the doctor, what does this actually mean for my risk? What's the likelihood that I'm going to have a cardiovascular event in the next 10 years?
All right, we are joined by Dr. Adam Cifu. Thanks for coming on and chatting with 2%.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a total pleasure.
So you launched Sensible Medicine with some other doctors. It's an amazing project that I recommend all my readers check out. We're going to link out to it, of course. But you recently wrote a post about the cult of the healthy lifestyle. What is the cult of the healthy lifestyle?
So the cult of the healthy lifestyle, I admitted, I think in the first line of the article that the title was clickbait, because I am a fan of the healthy lifestyle, and I think you would not be having me on if I was not. But what I was objecting to was the sort of cultish dedication that some people have, where they feel like a healthy lifestyle is an absolute panacea, that if you follow this, you will never be ill. Maybe you'll never die. And where it affects me most, I think, as a physician, is when I share stories about patients and people's reaction is often, well, if this person ate better or exercised more or was less obese, they wouldn't have any of these problems. And I find that somewhat insensitive, not empathic, something like that, as someone who cares for people.
Yeah, how do you find that affects patients? Are they getting that message that if they were to just eat better and exercise, they wouldn't have these problems? And that creates some sort of, anxiety or feelings of guilt? Or how does that manifest itself?
I think it's almost natural that when many of us become ill, right, we look to blame something, right? Some of us blame things in the outside world. I actually think it's more common that people blame themselves, something they've done, somehow they've fallen short. And listen, that's sometimes the case, right? There are people who've smoked for 40 years and, when they're diagnosed with emphysema or lung cancer and they say, if I hadn't smoked, I wouldn't have this, they're right. But more often than not, people are blaming themselves for things that they have little control over. We live in a world these days where our food supply is a mess. What our jobs are like. Many of us are sort of basically forced to, live sedentary lives at work. The economy is such that many people just, don't have the outlets to have time to do the things that we love and that we know are important. And so mostly I try to sort of focus on, look, what within your life can you do better? And what can we treat? Because also, in the 21st century, we're fortunate to have a lot of the therapies that we do have now.
Yeah. Was there a particular thing that prompted this piece? Is it just something about the moment we're in? Like, what prompted it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, and some people objected. They're like, this is a straw man argument. Nobody says this. Maybe I spend too much time on, social media. And part of what I like to do as I reflect on my career is to share very de-identified stories of people, struggling with illness and working their way through the medical field. And it was more of a constant drumbeat of not only blaming the patient for their disease, but kind of blaming me for using 21st century medicine rather than just really doubling down on a healthy lifestyle that was obviously going to be the cure for these people. And how was I completely giving up on free will when I was treating addiction like a disease?
Yeah, that makes sense. I do think, and maybe you've seen this as well since I think we're both kind of online a bit, I do find that there's been a sort of ramping up of posts around exercise or diet like cures everything.
Right.
It's kind of like quippy posts that are, oh, you don't feel good? Go exercise. Oh, you
Yeah.
don't have enough money? Go exercise. You'll get this mindset that'll help you then make money. And I do think there's kind of been this shift to your point, this cult where this can cure all. Of course, it's good. We should all be, focusing on what we eat. We should all be trying to move in the time we have. But the idea that it's just going to fix all problems, I think, is maybe a little misguided.
And it's hard because I think, and it's probably true of all misinformation, right? Is that there is truth. I've heard you say that really, as far as health and disease prevention, there's probably no other single bullet that's as good, as staying active. And not only is it beneficial for weight and blood pressure and diabetes prevention and mood, but it's one of the few things that kind of crosses all of those levels. And so there's truth there. It's something that we should advocate for, but we should also be realistic.
Yeah. What problems, when you work with patients, what are the hurdles they tend to face in terms of adopting some good practices? And do you ever have, and also this is kind of a follow-up question, do you ever have patients who seem to be doing everything right, but something just pops up? And what do those cases tend to be like?
Right. So to answer your first question, it's interesting. I think that the biggest obstacle is, the perfect being the enemy of the good. That people are sort of like, I can't go out and run 30 minutes a day, 6 days out of the week. And that may be because, their knee osteoarthritis. It may be because they're in poor shape. It may be because of their time. And so for those people, it's a lot of advocating that like, boy, starting anywhere helps. And my start for people is, usually a 20-minute brisk walk where you're a little bit out of breath, and that may not even be a brisk walk at the beginning. That might just be a walk, and that's fine. And you can do that anywhere. I have people who walk up and down, the stairs in their 3-flat, as their exercise and whatever, Your second question, I would say that unfortunately, I'm a general internist. I've been in the same practice since 1997. And as you can imagine, therefore taking care of, the same set of patients for pushing 30 years now.
Could you also quickly define what a general internist is? And you wrote about this, which I'll link to. I loved the post, but it would be great if you could quickly define that for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I, after medical school, I did an internal medicine residency. And internists sort of learn to take care of the sickest patients, both as inpatient and outpatient. So most of my residency was, inpatient, taking care of hospitalized people with basically every problem you can imagine. And I, during that and during the outpatient portion of that, got very interested in both outpatient medicine and medical education. And so while many of my colleagues did things like gastroenterology fellowships or cardiology fellowships or rheumatology fellowships, I stayed as a generalist. And so I sort of take care of anybody who walks through my door. And I guess in the piece, I sort of pitched that, if you're someone, I don't know, over 50 or someone with any ongoing health issues, you should probably have a general internist in your corner.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And then I interrupted your answer to the question about...
Yeah, I was going to say that I take care of an older, therefore, somewhat sicker population. And so I have many patients who truly do everything right, and then have a, health challenge, either minor or major. And that's because, we're human. There's sort of no avoiding that.
It's kind of a mix of environment and genetics, or...
I think that's absolutely the case. And it is interesting, over the course of my career, I maybe somewhat morbidly, I keep track, every one of my patients who dies, I sort of hold on to their face sheet. I've actually written about this in the past and write on it, what did this person pass from? And it's interesting to see how that's evolved over time, both as health has evolved and as practice has evolved, because there's some medical illnesses, HIV, for instance, that like we barely see people die of anymore. At the beginning of my career, boy, I saw, a ton of lung cancer, a ton of heart disease. And interestingly, as there's less smoking in my population, as people have gotten healthier, both through activity and things like trans fat coming out of the food supply and smoking less, I see even less of that now. But then what happens is I see more and more people who, in their 80s and 90s, just things kind of wear out and their falls or other problems.
Yeah. So you're generally seeing people live longer, and that trend, something's going to get you.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And obviously I've got a skewed practice, right? I've got people who are, I don't know, let's say lucky enough to be able to stick with the same doctor, keep health insurance, for decades. And that is a special bunch of people. They're certainly not nearly all wealthy, but there's something going right for that group.
Yeah. Do you feel like there's been a shift, at least online, where doctors are getting more criticism in terms of, and I'm going to sort of just make this argument up, but it's kind of one that I see where doctors just kind of push people into medicine, and you kind of know where I'm going with this. Have you seen that?
I absolutely have seen that. And maybe it's part of, I don't know, maybe our whole conversation will be about, what's true and what's not true in disinformation, right? I think as healthcare has gotten to be more of a business and many doctors are more and more kind of overwhelmed with their schedules and with quantity, it actually takes work to do less in medicine, right? To be thoughtful about diagnostic tests, to be thoughtful about therapy, what's really necessary. It's generally the easiest thing to do to write a prescription, to order another CT scan. It's harder to think deeply through a case, use the history and physical examination, think 2 steps ahead about what are we going to do with this information that we've obtained. And so people rightly object to the medicalization of a lot of things, including a lot of health. But then also, I think people lose sight of the fact that there are people who are truly sick, and medicine can provide some unbelievable promise to people who, 10 years ago would have died of the disease they have.
Mm-hmm. Has perhaps more medicalization, has that largely been a function of reduced amount of time that doctors have to spend with patients, do you think? Or what drives that?
I think that's part of it. I think it's partly a very intelligent and motivated pharmaceutical industry, right, which does a very good job of, changing what our cut points are for diabetes, what our cut points is for pre-diabetes, this sort of medicalizing things which are maybe just outside the normal range of health. And so there are things that I would have never dreamed of calling an illness or treating 25 years ago, which now patients come in and say, do you think I have X? Is there a pill for it? So it's not just doctors at fault. It's how we as patients, as regular people, have been, I don't know, either educated or brainwashed, depending on how you want to look at it. So when you come to your doctor, your expectations are very different than they used to be.
What's an example of something that you wouldn't have treated 25 years ago that now people ask about?
Yeah, well, so I think prediabetes is maybe the most important thing. Over the course of my career, how we diagnose diabetes has completely changed, where, we use hemoglobin A1C as our primary tool, which is the kind of, a surrogate marker for the average sugar. Most of your listeners, I know this well from having listened to you in the past. And now we use that. The issue is that gives us a, sort of a continuous variable, right? Running from, let's say, 4 to 14. And what's abnormal there? Well, that's just the line that you draw. And, where that line is, as far as what is diabetes, has moved lower and lower, kind of more and more normal. And then even for people at the top range of normal, the sort of 5.7 to 6.5 range, has been named prediabetes, right? And then there have been drug trials to say that, does treating pre-diabetes with meds keep people from progressing to diabetes? We don't need to get into the flaws in the design of those studies. But sure, if you put people on a medication that lowers sugar and then you recheck it, their sugar's lower and it looks like maybe you've cured pre-diabetes. In fact, you've just treated a, mildly elevated sugar that maybe could have been treated in ways without medications.
Yeah. What are the conversations that you have with patients who are in that spot? And how do you kind of walk them through their options and your own thinking about that?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is really personalizing healthcare. And maybe this gets back a little bit to my reacting a little too strongly and being too prickly about, the cult of the healthy lifestyle, is that there are really patients who, because of who they are, and because they're not at all, they don't find it at all problematic to, take another medication for something. And maybe because of the way they view risk, are very open to like, my number's high, I want to treat it. What can we do about this? There are other people who are much more open and maybe really looking for, what are more simple solutions to this? What is actually the risk I'm taking by working on this over the next 3, 6 months, 3 years? And those are people who I'm often actually really excited to work with. Probably more than me that behavioral change is very hard, and it's, the minority of people who can really make big changes in what they do and make their numbers look completely different. But boy, it happens, and it is amazing when it does.
How would you recommend people listening have conversations with their doctors so they sort of know their optionality? Like, is that possible if you're kind of going to, you're getting your checkup and it's kind of quick? Like, how do you begin to have those conversations?
So I encourage people to make it clear to their doctor what they want to talk about, because the way visits often run is that, doctors walk in with an agenda, look over the patient's history, look over the screening tests they're due for, all that. It's like, this is what I want to accomplish today. And the patient usually walks in with an agenda, and usually the doctor is perfectly comfortable abandoning their agenda if there is something important that the patient has to speak of. That happens seamlessly if the patient comes in complaining of, crushing substernal chest pain or is gasping for breath. It's a little bit harder when the patient sort of wants counseling. And so I often tell people, hey, when you make that visit, put into the chart or, ask the scheduler to put in the chart that this visit is to talk about X, and bring that up at the beginning. Like, hey, I'm coming in because I noticed that my hemoglobin A1C was a little bit elevated, that my blood pressure is a little bit elevated, that I'm still smoking 10 cigarettes a day and I just can't get off that. And then ask the doctor, like, what does this actually mean for my risk? What's the likelihood that I'm going to have a cardiovascular event in the next 10 years? If I make these changes, if I get these numbers better, how much would my risk be better? And then how can we achieve that? And it's really a we, because it's often the doctor doing some work and counseling in the visit, but then it's absolutely the person, who leaves the office who has to live with that decision for however long to sort of make those changes.
Makes sense. You post the Cult of the Healthy Lifestyle post, and it got a lot of comments.
Got a lot of comments.
What sort of comments did you see come in? What were positive? What were negative? Kind of what did you learn from the comments?
What I often learn from the comments is that there is a lot of anger about healthcare in America today. And that anger comes out in almost anything I write. To some people, 21st century American medicine is an enemy. And so there are people who reacted, I think, a little bit how I'd expect. Here you are just trying to medicalize things again and push drugs and say that a healthy lifestyle is fool's gold and we'll never achieve it. I have been, not to not to butter up our readers and listeners, but I've been really impressed at a lot of the sort of thoughtfulness in the sensible medicine readership. And there were a lot of people who absolutely recognize that, like, hey, the healthy lifestyle has an important place, but there is a lot of challenges to incorporating healthy lifestyle into our life today, and we're sort of thoughtful and empathic. And then I think what I wasn't expecting, and maybe I was, stupid to not expect it, is that so much gets politicized these days. And when people hear healthy lifestyle, all of a sudden these days they think Maha and, Robert Kennedy. And I was not thinking about that. I did not write a political piece, pro or con. But keeping my political stripes to myself, I think it's wonderful that there are more people who are, thinking about the food supply and activity and exercise in young people, and making recess healthy again, or however you titled it. I think are all good things.
Yeah. What's your sense of the interest in longevity and some of the more aggressive prevention practices? Leaving that question purposely vague to see how to answer it.
So I think there is a lot of misinformation and snake oil peddling in the longevity space. Listen, I don't think any of us are against living longer and living better, right? That's part of what gets me out of bed in the morning, for a run or a swim or whatever. My kind of research career, to a great extent with Vinay Prasad, who's another of the authors and editors on Sensible Medicine, has been looking at medical reversal, have been things that have been adopted by medicine for the wrong reasons, which then we have to go back and abandon. And generally the reasons that happens is because we adopt therapies or practices without a strong enough evidence base, based on a theory, a hypothesis that, you know what, maybe this will work. It should work. On the blackboard, it should work. But then with like lousy data, a mouse model, or measurements of surrogate endpoints. And then actually, once we get it into the incredibly complex human body, it turns out these things don't work. And many of the things that, it sounds disrespectful, but I'll just say, longevity gurus, whoever it is, a lot of the things that they propose, makes sense. But boy, making sense and actually being effective is an enormous chasm. And if people are wealthy and these things are harmless and it's not interfering with other things we know helps, like there's not an opportunity cost, fine. But boy, I worry that maybe some of these things are harmful. Maybe people are spending too much money on them. Maybe people are using them and not doing things that we actually know work to keep people healthy.
Mm-hmm. What's a good example of medical reversal, so some our listeners kind of understand some case studies?
Yeah, so the place that I always start, because it's probably one of the things that got me most interested in it to begin with, was estrogen replacement therapy. When I trained and first got into practice, it was kind of standard of care that when women went through menopause, we would say, you now have an estrogen deficiency and, you should start estrogen. And I would give this talk to them that like estrogen is very good for the bones. It's a little bit bad for the breasts. It's very good for the heart. Most people die of heart disease. And so you should use this. And that was based on, observational data that had a lot of confounding and bias built into it. And then once we started to do randomized controlled trials, we learned that estrogen, probably at best was a wash, had some benefits, had some harms. There are a small group of people who really benefit symptomatically from being on estrogen replacement therapy. And those people, should probably use it for a short period of time. But the idea that the entire postmenopausal population should be on estrogen, which was a little bit how we were practicing, was crazy. And so that's, one kind of classic example.
Yeah. And you've written about medical conservatism. Could you, I guess, define that and then tell us how you think about that and how that shapes how you work with patients?
Sure.
and what you write about on Sensible Medicine as well.
Yeah, so medical conservatism, and we wrote an article, Dr. Prasad, um, John Mandrola, who is the third editor on Sensible Medicine, and Andrew Foy, who's a cardiologist. We all wrote it together. I talk about it as my manifesto sometimes. And the idea, I don't think is controversial. It's that health is important. We should, to some extent, tap on the brakes when we are adopting new therapies to say we'd like robust evidence to be sure that things we're doing in medicine work. We'd like to really carefully weigh risks and benefits, or harms and benefits, when we adopt therapy. Harms should include financial harms. And we should be the most careful when we're talking not about treating sick patients, but about taking healthy patients or healthy people and kind of turning them into patients through screening, through, calling healthy parts of normal, pre-disease, things like that.
Yeah. What are some examples that you think we need a little more medical conservatism today?
Yeah.
Generally.
So I would say the things that I work the most on in my practice, we talked about diabetes, screening, especially cancer screenings, prostate cancer in men, mammography in women, colon cancer in everybody. These screening tests, I am convinced, save lives, but they do so at a cost. You had a terrific podcast a while back talking about, MRI imaging, and your guest did a absolutely spectacular job at sort of highlighting almost the hidden costs of screening. I think that's a very important place. And though it's not allowed conversation in, some polite societies, there are adult vaccinations that we need to be smart about. I am, deeply on record as like, boy, the first COVID vaccines were absolutely life-saving. And that's a hill I will die on. The fact that we have, kind of evolved into, one should take a yearly or a bi-yearly COVID shot, without the really robust evidence, not robust evidence telling us it works, but to tell us like how great is the benefit for people at various levels of risk. And so a 50-year-old healthy person may make one decision, a 60-year-old person with asthma may make another decision, and an 85-year-old, person in a nursing home may make a completely different decision. And that's fine. That's how, intelligent, thoughtful health care and health consumption should work.
Yeah. How do you recommend people find a doctor to work with that is willing to sort of have these deeper conversations? So I live in Las Vegas, and we're a little sparse on doctors.
Yeah.
And it took me a lot of work I now found a guy that I love, but it took me a while.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, maybe I'll pass on that question. It's really hard. And, you talked about my post about, what is a generalist? Part of that was like a recruitment post, right? We need more, good generalists out there. And it's not just internists, it's, excuse me, it's family medicine doctors, it's med peds doctors. There's so many people who do a good job at this. But we need more of them. I think the one thing that I often state, and it's similar, I guess, to my recommendations that you asked for about getting good counseling, is to, be empowered when you're meeting a doctor the first time about, interviewing that person, right? I have friends who, interview cleaning services for longer than they interview their physician. And make that first visit like, hey, I kind of don't want your recommendations about my blood pressure medications today. I really just want to talk, get to know you, make sure I'm someone that I feel comfortable with talking to, and whose, values as far as healthcare line up. I had a mentor in residency who used to, as part of the initial visit, this was a doctor who would ask the patient, hey, what do you expect from me as your doctor? And then this guy who, was quite a person would say, this is what I expect from you as my patient, but it was pretty great because it kind of got everything out in the open at that first visit.
Yeah, that's great. So back to the cult of the healthy lifestyle. We were talking about this a little before we hit record, and how it seems that there's a lot more information about lifestyle health around. How do you go about parsing it as a person who's taking it in and also working with people?
Yeah. So I think given where I am, both in my career and maybe in life, I am a real skeptic. And I feel that probably most of the important things are things we know, right? Exercise is good. Smoking is bad. Alcohol's bad. Most diet things, one should do in moderation. I love the, eat, whatever it is, eat a little bit of everything and a lot of nothing, right? It's probably a great piece of advice. And so when new recommendations come out, my first step is to just discount it and say I'm not interested. When it seems like maybe there's something behind it, when people are getting excited about it, then I really do take a deep dive into the literature. The problem with a lot of especially diet research is that the papers are wildly confounded because they're mostly observational studies. Doing, randomized controlled trials of diet interventions are harder. I think exercise is somewhat different because there is a wonderful literature of kind of exercise science, exercise physiology. There are some real randomized trials about things, about recovery, especially. You do a very nice job, I think, of covering that in your work. And so I think that's probably an area that we can learn a lot from. I think the reality, though, is, most people, what they need to do is they just need to find something they really like and that they'll do and exercise. And that the people who the little changes make a difference to is a very small part of the population where you're like, man, you're in great shape. You're exercising just about every day. If you want to go, make things a little bit better, you can learn something here. But that's a small audience.
Yeah. So you're rather active and eat well yourself. What is your own approach to these topics?
I think, and this is probably like many of your listeners, I don't think I'm anything special. I feel like there are a lot of things that I do every day, and one of the important things of that is exercising. I cannot miss a day. I'm in my late 50s, and this was easier to do when I was 30 and could run every day, and I was fine. I can't do that anymore. So I, exercise for about an hour a day, but I do something different pretty much every day. The thing I do most is swimming, which I do 3 times a week, and everything else I do, 1 or 2 times a week. And it's important for me. It makes me feel better, makes me feel like I'm taking care of myself, is incredibly good for me mentally. And I think actually makes me more productive in my profession because, man, the number of times that I come up with ideas for things to write about, for things to research, for things to look into in the middle of a swim, I can't count.
Yeah, that's absolutely been my experience as well. I think that probably half of my books have been written out on a trail when I'm just kind of observing, and then a thought pops in there, and I put it in the recorder, put it in the notes app, or whatever it is.
I love it because often when you get back, right, you realize like some of those ideas were terrific ideas. Some of those ideas were probably some sort of dopamine clouded craziness. And when you write it down, you're like, what the hell was I thinking?
Yeah, totally. It's great. It's a gamble every time. You never know what it's going to be. What didn't I ask you that would be good to know specifically kind of about the piece around the cult of the healthy lifestyle and just anything else you think would be useful?
Yeah, I think your questions were terrific. And did a nice job of, sort of figuring out the balance and, the complexity of a lot of this decision making. I think maybe, I don't want to sound like I'm self-promoting because this is a 10-year-old book, which doesn't sell a lot. We wrote a book called Ending Medical Reversal. And in that, we spent a lot of time speaking to both doctors and, just sort of the intelligent lay audience about how to make decisions. About health information. And some of the things in that book are dated, but I'm still pretty proud of it. And I, will hear doctors say things that they heard and they're like, oh, I heard such and such. And I want to bang my head against the wall saying like, God, you of all people should be able to test that statement. And I think we'd all be better off if we were all a little bit more thoughtful about accepting what people tell us.
Yeah. Was starting Sensible Medicine, was that kind of an outgrowth of the book?
I think, John Mandrola, Vinay Prasad, and myself, we have bounced ideas off each other for a long time. I'm at the point in my career where publishing in medical journals sort of means nothing to me anymore. John, I think, will proudly say he's not an academic, and that's not really a big part of his career. And we were looking for a place that people could exchange ideas, hopefully exchange some ideas that are a little bit outside the mainstream, and that there could be productive conversation, because there's so much just nastiness out there, whether it be on Twitter or even whether that be in the medical establishment about things that, you shouldn't say. And so I guess it's a little bit ending medical reversal. It's a little bit medical conservative. And hopefully it's just like honestly trying to be sensible about, how we take care of ourselves.
Yeah. Well, it's a great publication. You all are doing a great job.
Thank you.
Well, Adam, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us.
Michael, I really appreciate it. This was wonderful.